We're here to inform the public, the community at large, about what we've been doing to safeguard our churches as Catholic worship sites, the Church of St. Rita and the Church of Corpus Christi, and to let everyone know why we're confident in our efforts, principally because of recent decisions in similar cases in other dioceses, particularly the Diocese of Springfield, by the highest court in the church legal system.
And what was their decision?
The decision there, this is in the Diocese of Springfield, the decision there was that the churches, former parochial churches, the churches of 3 parishes which had been suppressed, they no longer exist, the parishes no longer exist, the churches were to remain open as Catholic worship sites in some way, shape, or form. They didn't say how many masses, what time, that's up to the bishop to decide those things. But they said they needed to be safeguarded as Catholic worship sites. And they're basically the same cases that we're putting forward, so we're very encouraged.
So you're looking not to keep these open as churches as we know them, but just kind of a place to drop in anytime, have worship, or you talk about mass schedules still?
So what we're saying is these are sacred spaces. These are sacred sites. And as sacred sites, a church, by law, by church law, a church is to remain open to the faithful to be able to receive the sacraments. It's up to the bishop to decide, or a pastor to decide what that schedule would be, but it is to be used for the celebration of the sacraments. And we're saying that these are churches, and they should be reopened in some way, either as a chapel, or as a mission church, or perhaps a shrine, a retreat house, that would have a chapel associated with it, some way that these are maintained as Catholic worship sites for the faithful of the Diocese of Sault Ste. Marie.
In its entirety, because Corpus Christi, obviously, what are you going to do in that situation when people have already moved in?
Well, our understanding is that the Yes Employment Services are soon to move out. Okay, they were there on a temporary basis. Now, the present owner has applied to get rezoning so that he can then redesign the interior for commercial office space. What we have argued to the city, and we'll see what their legal department has said about this. What we've argued to the Planning Advisory Committee is that they can't make a decision to approve that request or to not approve that request because our appeal is going forward. Church law needs to be able to operate uninhibited, unhindered by civil law. So they can't do something which would be detrimental to this case. They need to let this case go through and see what the Vatican courts say about our case. And if the Vatican courts say what we hope that they will say, which is it's still a church, it was sold illicitly, and the diocese needs to make some effort to have it returned into their possession, then we'll go from there. If they say, well, the bishop erred, but we're not going to force him to do that, but we'll compensate the parishioners in some other way, we'll go from there. We want to wait and see. For Corpus Christi, we don't want the city to do anything that would hinder the possible outcome of our appeal.
So you're asking the owner of the property basically to hold on to it possibly for years, pay taxes on it, and then in the end possibly not own it any further, and at the same time not have the right to income.
What I've actually suggested publicly at the Planning Advisory Committee is that we consider the sale of the church to be illicit, and that what he should do is to do what anybody should do when they have illicit goods in their possession. They should give it back to the proper owners. I believe that right now he shouldn't wait for the Vatican to make any decision. I believe he should put it back into the hands of the Catholic Church.
Wasn't it the Catholic Church that sold it?
Yeah, and I think we think they sold it illicitly.
How long is it going to take before you hear about this case and know whether, you've won or not?
Well, we don't like to use the word win, okay? We like to say successful, okay? And we suspect that we're hopeful that before the end of this calendar year that the Congregation for the Clergy in Rome will make decisions by that time. There's no guarantee, right? But we're hopeful because it usually takes within a year for these things to happen, and we're getting close to that time that period of time. So we're hoping by the end of this year we'll hear something for both appeals.
Is the bishop able to comment on this while it goes through the legal process?
Certainly he can, absolutely.
Philip, if you are successful, in winning your appeal, what happens to basically Corpus Christi and St. Rita's? Would construction and everything halt, and then you would refurbish it as a church, or kind of what's your future planning looking like?
Well, for St. Rita's, nothing has been done in the church, in the sanctuary, which would require a great deal of work, right? The statues have been removed, the pews have been removed. I suspect some of the other religious art has been removed, but the altar is still there, and there's been no construction or deconstruction. It could be used right now, right? So that's not an issue. For Corpus Christi, there has been nothing done physically in the church which would inhibit us from restoring it as a chapel relatively quickly. The only thing that has happened physically in the sanctuary portion is a removal of a wall. And as I've said before in other venues, that particular wall, we were probably going to remove it anyway to redesign the sanctuary itself. So nothing's happened that would inhibit us from coming back in and starting to worship immediately.
Yeah, how do you keep this optimism going as you drive up and down Castle Street and you see it being deconstructed?
Well, actually, what we saw was it having a bit of a facelift in a sense, right? He's done us a great service by reinsulating it. He's got new windows in there. It's going to be more energy efficient. This is what we were hoping to do anyway. We had a plan as chair of the pastoral council. I had put together, with the help of a private company, a plan to put solar panels on our roof. I mean, it still could be done. That's the exterior of the church. It's the interior that matters, the ability to come in and worship. That's what's important. And so I'm not discouraged at all. Besides, we've submitted ourselves to the authorities in the matter, right? And we put it in their hands, and we pray. So, and we're encouraged by our relationships, and we just trust that something good will happen.
Have you lost a lot of parishioners to other churches? Is there still that big crowd that was backing you? Are they still there, or have they kind of admitted to the fact that their church may be lost and they're going elsewhere?
Well, at this particular point in time, our two churches have been, as I've said, they've been incorrectly closed, right? And therefore, if people want to worship, and they do want to worship, they have to worship elsewhere. It's a practical situation. They have to go worship elsewhere. If we're successful, as we believe we will be, let's just talk about St. Rita's, for instance, then it has to be maintained as a worship site. The bishop would then have to engage, well, who would have the specific authority? Would it become a chapel associated with another parish? Would it be a shrine? Would it be a mission church? Or could it be an oratory for a specific group in the city? Those things have to be worked out, okay? And then the schedule of masses need to be worked out. We're not suggesting that it would necessarily become a parish church again. We're suggesting that it needs to be open for worship. That is, for the celebration of the sacraments, weddings, funerals, baptisms, masses on special feast days, for instance. Those kinds of things need to be worked out over time, and I believe that people will come and worship, former parishioners and other parishioners of existing parishes. It would be open to all. That's what we envision seeing happen. And then for Corpus Christi, what we would like to see happen there, at a minimum, is a chapel where at least once a week there would be a Mass for the senior citizens in the neighborhood to be able to come and celebrate the Eucharist. At a minimum, that's what we would like to see happen. We have lots of other ideas, and they're all possible, but at a minimum, that's what we're looking for.
How will you be notified if you were successful or not? Will they call you? Will they send a registered letter? How does that communication go?
The Congregation of the Clergy will issue a decree, and they will send it to the people. For Corpus Christi, they will send it to the papal nuncio, who will then forward it on to me on behalf of the other appellants. For St. Rita's, the petitioners have hired canon lawyers in Rome. They're excellent. They will receive, my understanding is that they will receive the decree, and then from there it will be passed on to Benito and the other appellants.
So St. Rita's have hired canon lawyers in Rome, and Corpus Christi?
We're doing it on our own. Yeah.
Okay.
But we're doing it with, both groups have been able to do this through the generous financial support of our former parishioners and others.
Have you any hint that, you mentioned about getting it by the end of the year, so that would be, December 31st. Is that a cutoff, an official cutoff, or is that you've been given a hint that this is going to happen by then?
We suspect it will happen within that time frame because that's normally been the time frame of these appeals, within a year, okay?
And you started your appeal, it's been how long right now?
Well, we put in our first appeal in February and March, but it began the whole process began in January. So we suspect, we're hopeful. Now, this is the Vatican, right? It's a big organization, it's busy, it's got lots of things going on. I won't go into details here of some of the things that the Congregation of the Clergy is involved with. It could take longer, right? It could.
Perfect, good, thank you.
Do you know how long it took in Massachusetts Springfield to get their order?
Okay, so what happened in Massachusetts is that there was the decree from to suppress the parish, and that went through, and then it's a complicated situation. So there was that. Then there was the matter of the closure of the churches, and that went through the Congregation of the Clergy. Now that took again within a year. The diocese appealed that decree of the Congregation of the Clergy because the Congregation of the Clergy said they have to be maintained as Catholic worship sites. So they appealed it. And then the higher court basically took, I think, 6 or 7 months to respond, which was quite fast, for the higher court to deal with it.
So that's given you that hope that it's going to come before the end of the calendar year?
Yes, I think that there's a pattern. This is not just the only time that the Congregation of the Clergy or the High Court, the Apostolic Signatura, has ruled like this. There are other instances where this has happened. And in fact, I know of 2 cases where bishops have changed their decree because of the church rulings in other dioceses. They changed the decree in 2 churches to make them into chapels or oratories. They were going to close them, completely close them, and try and sell them, and then they reversed that because they could see what the Vatican was wanting to see happen with these churches. There's nothing stopping Bishop Plouffe at this particular moment to do the same thing. We don't have to carry on with this. He could issue a new decree that says they're going to, St. Rita's will be reopened as a chapel of XYZ, et cetera, et cetera. He could do that right now. And he could submit that to the appellants. He could submit that to Rome, and Rome would deal with it. It's very possible. This is what has happened in other dioceses. Corpus Christi is a different matter because it's been sold, right? So it's more complicated. And so our appeal is more complicated. St. Rita's is much more straightforward. So Corpus Christi, in a sense, is just a little bit more exciting, right? Because we'll have to see how this all shakes down.